I've lived in Millbrook my entire life. It's one of those quaint New England towns where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever really changes. At least, that's what I thought until last year. It started on a chilly October evening. I was getting ready for bed, standing in front of my old vanity mirror, the same one that had been in my room since I was a kid. As I was brushing my hair, I heard something. At first, I thought it was just the wind outside, but then I realized it sounded like a whisper. I froze, my brush midway through my hair. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit silly. Silence. I shook my head, chalking it up to my imagination. But just as I was about to turn away, I heard it again. This time, it was clearer. "Help me," the voice whispered. It was soft, almost childlike, and it seemed to be coming from the mirror. My heart started racing. I leaned in closer, my nose almost touching the glass. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. For a moment, there was nothing. Then she took me. She won't let me go. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. This couldn't be happening. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, and looked back at the mirror. Everything looked normal, just my own pale, wide-eyed reflection staring back at me. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was stressed from work and needed more rest. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next few nights were quiet, and I started to relax. Maybe it had been a one-time thing, a weird auditory hallucination or something. But then, about a week later, it happened again. I was getting ready for bed when the voice returned. This time, it told a story about a little girl who lived in my house decades ago, about how she disappeared one day and no one ever found her. I was terrified, but also intrigued. I started researching the history of my house, which had been in my family for generations. That's when I found out about Emily Parker, a 12-year-old girl who vanished without a trace in 1962. She had lived in this very house. The voice in the mirror became a nightly occurrence. Sometimes it would just whisper Emily's name. Other times it would share fragments of her life. I started to feel like I knew her, this girl from the past. One night, as I was listening to the voice, my cat, Milo, jumped onto the vanity. He arched his back, hissing at the mirror. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Milo had never acted like that before. I decided to dig deeper. In the attic, buried under boxes of old clothes and Christmas decorations, I found a small, dusty trunk. Inside was a diary, Emily's diary. Reading it was like stepping into another world. Emily wrote about her life, her dreams, and her fears. She mentioned a woman, someone she called the Shadow Lady, who she said was watching her. The entries became more frantic towards the end, with Emily writing about how she thought the Shadow Lady was going to take her away. The last entry was dated the day before Emily disappeared. I took the diary to the police, but they didn't take it seriously. To them, it was just the ramblings of a young girl with an overactive imagination. But I knew better. I had heard the voice. I had felt the presence in that mirror. Even now, months later, I sometimes hear whispers when I'm alone in my room. I've moved the vanity to the attic, but it doesn't seem to matter. Emily's presence lingers, her story unfinished. If you are enjoying it, please consider subscribing and clicking the like button to support my channel. I've always loved the solitude of hiking. There's something about the crisp air, the crunch of leaves under your boots, and the quiet whisper of the wind through the trees that just centers you, you know. At least, that's what I used to think. Now, the forest holds a different kind of silence for me. A silence that's thick with secrets and eyes that you can't see. It was supposed to be a simple day hike in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. I'd done this trail a dozen times before, but this time was different. I remember setting out early, the morning mist still clinging to the ferns and moss-covered logs. The air was damp and cool against my skin, and I could taste that earthy smell that's unique to the Pacific Northwest. About 2 hours in, I started to feel off. You know that prickly feeling you get when someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but all I could see were the towering Douglas firs and western red cedars stretching up into the canopy. I told myself I was being silly. I mean, it's a big forest, right? Lots of animals. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I stopped to take a breather and grab some water from my backpack. That's when I saw it. Tucked into the moss at the base of a tree was a small blue hair clip. My hair clip. The one I'd left on my bathroom counter that morning. My heart started hammering in my chest. I picked it up with trembling fingers, turning it over and over. There was no mistaking it the little butterfly design, the chip in one corner from where I dropped it last week. How the hell did it get here? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I dropped it on a previous hike? But no, I'd used it just yesterday. There was no way it could be here unless someone had been in my house. The thought made me feel sick. I stuffed the clip in my pocket and picked up my pace. I needed to get back to the trailhead, to my car, to safety. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something else that made my blood run cold. There, hanging from a low branch, was the scarf I'd worn to work on Friday. This isn't happening, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding thin and scared in the oppressive quiet of the forest. But it was happening. Someone had been in my home, had taken my things, and was now, what? Playing some sick game with me out here in the wilderness. I broke into a run, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees seemed to close in around me, their shadows stretching like grasping fingers across the trail. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I kept looking back, expecting to see someone or something emerging from the green gloom behind me. As I ran, I saw more of my belongings scattered along the path. A bookmark, a earring, even a page torn from my diary. Each item was like a punch to the gut, a reminder that someone had invaded my most private spaces. They knew me. They'd been watching me. And now they were toying with me. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, marked only by the pounding of my heart and the burn in my lungs. The trail signs were a blur. I wasn't even sure if I was heading in the right direction anymore. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. Finally, mercifully, I burst out of the tree line into the parking lot. My car was there, an island of normality in this surreal nightmare. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. Once inside, I locked the doors and just sat there, gulping air, trying to process what had happened. I called the rangers first, then the police. They searched the area but found nothing. No evidence of anyone else on the trail. No fingerprints on the items I'd collected. They took my statement, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. A woman alone in the woods, imagination running wild. They probably thought I'd staged the whole thing for attention. But I know what I saw, what I felt. In the weeks that followed, I installed a security system in my house. I stopped hiking. I even moved to a new apartment in the city. But I can't shake the feeling that someone's still out there, watching, waiting. It started off small, so small I almost didn't notice. I'd come home from work, and something would just feel off. Like, I'd swear I left my keys on the kitchen counter, but they'd be on the coffee table instead. Or I'd find a door open that I was sure I'd closed. At first, I brushed it off. I figured I was just stressed from work, not paying attention. But then things got weirder. I started feeling like I was being watched all the time. You know that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? Yeah, that. I'd be working late at night on my computer, and I'd get this overwhelming urge to look over my shoulder. But every time I did, there was nothing there. Just shadows. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the old house settling, right? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. So I decided to set up some security cameras. Nothing fancy, just a couple of those Wi-Fi enabled ones you can watch on your phone. I figured maybe I had a raccoon problem or something. God, I wish it had been raccoons. It was about a week after I set up the cameras. I was at work, bored out of my mind in a meeting, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from one of the cameras. I opened the app and, Jesus, my heart nearly stopped. There was someone in my apartment, but it wasn't like a normal burglar or something. This was different. It was like a shadow, but it moved on its own. It was tall, way taller than me, and it seemed to kind of glide through my living room. I watched, frozen in horror, as it moved from room to room, almost like it was looking for something. Or someone. I made some excuse and bolted out of the meeting. I called the cops, but by the time they got there, the figure was gone. They searched the place, but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. They looked at me like I was crazy when I tried to show them the footage. Because when I pulled it up again, the shadow was gone. The video just showed my empty apartment. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then it happened again. And again. I'd catch glimpses of this thing on the cameras, always when I wasn't home. But every time I tried to show someone else, the footage would be clean. I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate at work. I started staying at friends' places, making up excuses. But I couldn't avoid my apartment forever. Then came that night. God, I still have nightmares about it. I'd finally worked up the courage to spend the night at home again. I'd triple-checked all the locks, left lights on in every room. I was in bed, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, when I heard it. A creak from the hallway outside my bedroom. My blood turned to ice. I lay there, barely breathing, straining my ears. Another creak, closer this time. Then another. Something was coming down the hallway, heading straight for my room. I don't know what came over me, but suddenly I was out of bed, grabbing my phone and keys. As I yanked open my bedroom door, I saw it. The shadow. It was at the end of the hallway, tall and dark and wrong. Just wrong in a way I can't explain. I ran. God, I ran like I've never run before. Down the narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking under my feet. I could feel it behind me, moving silently, getting closer. I fumbled with my keys at the front door, my hands shaking so bad. I could barely get the key in the lock. Just as I got the door open, I felt something cold brush against my back. I didn't look back. I just ran out into the street in my pajamas, shouting for help. I never went back to that apartment. Left everything there, clothes, furniture, all of it. It wasn't worth it. I crashed on a friend's couch for a while, then moved clear across the country. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. If maybe I had some kind of mental breakdown. But then I remember the feeling of that cold touch on my back, And I know, whatever was in that apartment, it was real. And it was after me. I don't know if it was a ghost or what. All I know is I'll never feel truly safe in my own home again. Because now I know that sometimes the shadows move on their own. Who expects to find out they're not alone in their own home? But that's exactly what happened to me in my sleek Seattle loft last year, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'd always prided myself on my minimalist lifestyle. Clean lines, open spaces, everything in its place. My loft was my sanctuary, all polished concrete and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was supposed to be my safe haven after long days at the tech startup where I worked. It started with little things, you know? A book slightly out of place on the shelf, or my keys on the kitchen counter when I could have sworn I'd left them by the door. At first, I brushed it off. I mean, we all have moments where we forget things, right? But then it got weirder. One morning, I woke up to find my laptop open on the couch, when I distinctly remembered closing it and putting it away before bed. Another day, I came home to find a half-empty glass of water on the coffee table. I live alone, and I'm not the type to leave dishes out. I started to feel unsettled. Like something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, even though I knew I was alone in the apartment. The open layout that I'd once loved started to feel exposed, vulnerable. You're being paranoid, I told myself. But the feeling wouldn't go away. So I did what any tech-savvy millennial would do. I installed cameras. Nothing fancy, just a couple of small Wi-Fi-enabled cams that I could check from my phone. One in the living area, one covering the entrance. I figured they'd put my mind at ease, show me that I was just being silly. God, I wish that had been the case. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I was at work, pulling a late one to finish a project. Around PM, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from one of the cameras. I opened the app, expecting to see that I'd left a window open and the curtain was moving or something. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. There was someone in my apartment. A figure moving silently through my living room. They were dressed all in black, face obscured by a hood. I watched paralyzed as they moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the layout of my home. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I fumbled with my phone, hands shaking as I dialed 911. There's someone in my apartment. I managed to choke out, giving them my address. As I waited for the police, I couldn't tear my eyes away from the feed. The intruder moved methodically, checking drawers, looking under furniture. They picked up my laptop, examined it, then put it back exactly where it had been. It was surreal, watching this stranger violate my space with such familiarity. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. One moment they were there, the next nothing. I rewound the footage, trying to see how they'd left, but it was like they'd vanished into thin air. The police arrived a few minutes later, lights flashing, but of course there was no sign of the intruder. I showed them the footage, my voice shaking as I explained what I'd seen. They searched the apartment, but found no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been there besides me. If it hadn't been for the video, I might have thought I was losing my mind. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoia. I stayed with a friend, only going back to the loft with the police to install more cameras and change the locks. But the question kept nagging at me, how were they getting in? It took a week of obsessive review of the footage before I spotted it. In the corner of the living room, where the wall met the ceiling, there was a barely perceptible movement. A panel sliding open. A secret entrance built into the very structure of the building. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. How long had they been coming in and out? How many nights had I slept, blissfully unaware of the intruder moving silently through my home? The police investigation that followed uncovered a nightmare scenario. The previous owner of the loft had been a contractor who'd built hidden passageways throughout the building. He'd been using them to enter apartments, observing and sometimes stealing from the residents. I wasn't the only victim, there were others, all of us living with this invisible threat. They caught him eventually. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling of violation. The open spaces I once loved feel exposed, dangerous. Every creak, every shadow makes me jump. I've moved since then to a small house where I can see every corner, every entrance. But I still check the cameras obsessively, still wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, certain that I've heard footsteps. Because once you've lived with an invisible intruder, you never really feel alone again. Thank you for listening. Now try to sleep.